Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Bajirao IAS Academy, daily newspaper analysis. Today is 23rd December 2025, and today we have a list of topics for our discussion. So, the first topic is about India-New Zealand Free Trade Agreement, and then right to healthy environment. It is one of the fundamental rights as recognized by the Supreme Court, and then the recent Aravalli conflict. So the mining that has been carried out in Aravalli Hills and public resentment against this mining, and also we'll understand the internationalization of higher education in India. So these are the topics listed for today. And the first topic with which we are going to start the session is about India-New Zealand Free Trade Agreement. Now, in fact, in recent times, India has been signing free trade agreements with a number of countries, and recent one was Oman. So immediately after Oman, India signed this free trade agreement with the New Zealand as well. Now, one thing that we should understand that a free trade agreement help us eliminate tariffs, right? So there will be a zero tariffs or less tariffs. Now, in fact, the free trade agreements will help both countries to increase bilateral trade among themselves. So whatever sectors that they have a competitiveness, right? So whatever sectors, so if they export those goods into the other countries, and those sectors will benefit, the countries will benefit. So in fact, all these sectors are considered as a competitive sectors, and therefore India has been looking to sign these free trade agreements with other countries as well, and the recent one was New Zealand. Now let's understand India and New Zealand free trade agreement in detail. Now, in fact, the free trade agreement has already been concluded, right? Now, in fact, as part of this free trade agreement, India will be getting tariff-free access to New Zealand's market. Now, tariff-free access in the sense that whatever goods that India exports to New Zealand, whatever goods India exports to New Zealand, now while entering New Zealand's markets, so Indian goods will pay either lesser tariffs or zero tariffs. Now, in fact, it will help further increasing Indian exports or enhancing Indian exports to New Zealand. So therefore, this free trade agreement essentially aimed at reducing tariffs between these two countries, and this free trade agreement will provide India zero tariff or tariff-free market access to New Zealand's market. And in fact, this free trade agreement is also having other spin-off effects as well. So along with giving a sustained boost to trade and development, now in fact, it also helps attract an investment worth of $20 billion over the next 15 years. So investment is also very important for a country like India, right? So therefore, under the free trade agreement, we can expect that in the coming 15 years, New Zealand will invest around $20 billion in the Indian economy. And in fact, both these countries, as part of this free trade agreement, also aimed to reach a bilateral trade of $5 billion in the coming 5 years. So in the coming 5 years, the bilateral trade should double the bilateral trade to $5 billion within the next 5 years. So these are the objectives with which India and New Zealand have signed a free trade agreement. Now, I am reiterating this again. Free trade agreement provides zero tariff access to the other countries' markets. For example, we have discussed that Trump has imposed 50% tariffs on Indian goods to US markets. So increasing tariffs will slow down the export growth of Indian exports to those countries. India should look for the alternatives. So few things that we should understand here. With Europe and US, we have a trade surplus. So what exactly is this trade surplus? Trade surplus actually means that India is exporting more goods rather than what it has been importing. Now imagine that trade surplus means, for example, if India has been exporting ₹100 worth of goods, it has been just importing just 60 rupees worth of goods from those countries. So therefore, this trade surplus is 40 rupees in favor of India. But however, if you look at the countries like China, we have a trade deficit. We have been enjoying trade deficit with countries like China, Russia, and Southeast Asian countries. What exactly is this trade deficit? For example, if India has been exporting 60 rupees worth of goods, India has been importing 100 rupees worth of goods from those countries, right? So therefore, we have a 40 rupees of trade deficit. So this is trade deficit and this is trade surplus. Now, in fact, trade surplus will benefit Indian economy, will boost exports, right? So therefore, India always look for those countries where we have an advantage, and the plan is to sign a free trade agreement so that it will further strengthen India's bilateral trade with those countries. That is the objective with which the free trade agreements are being signed. However, now in fact, this free trade agreement between India and New Zealand will be formally signed in the first half of 2026. So it has been finalized, right? So these are the objectives of the free trade agreement between India and New Zealand. I hope you have understood this. Now let's understand the bilateral relations very briefly, because bilateral relations are the foundation stone for the free trade agreement between India and New Zealand. So let's understand this in detail, the bilateral relations. Now, in fact, so when India and New Zealand have established diplomatic relations, so it was in the year 1952, both India and New Zealand have established formal diplomatic relations. Now, in fact, both India and New Zealand have the historical relationship that the both are members of the British Commonwealth. Now, what exactly is this British Commonwealth? So, British Commonwealth is a group of countries. Now, in fact, all those countries once colonized by the British, right? So, once they were colonized by the British rulers. So, they were now independent. Those countries which were once colonized by the British rulers are now independent. So all those countries which were under the colonial rule, which were under the British rule, they were called as Commonwealth Group of Nations. So India is a Commonwealth Group of Nation and New Zealand is also a Commonwealth Group of Nation. Now, apart from that, both these countries have common law traditions. Common law traditions in the sense that parliamentary form of government. Both New Zealand has a parliamentary form of government and India is also having a parliamentary form of government. Now, in fact, this parliamentary form of government has been borrowed from the British constitution, right? So, or a British tradition. So, therefore, we mostly have these common law traditions and even democratic governance as well. So New Zealand is a democracy and India is also a democracy. Now, apart from that, sports actually play a very important connecting role between India and New Zealand, right? For example, sports like cricket, hockey, and mountaineering. Now, in fact, these sports play a very, very important role in strengthening people-to-people relations, right? So, in fact, tourism is also another arena where it actually fostered the goodwill between the people of India and the people of New Zealand. So sports and tourism are the two important factors which actually played a very important role in strengthening the bilateral relations between India and New Zealand. So let's understand the strategic vision and policy frameworks between these two countries. So if we talk about the strategic vision, so every country would have a strategic vision in the sense that how it would like to engage with the rest of the countries in the world in the long term, right? So how it wanted to strengthen its relationship, how it wanted to maintain its relationship with other countries is a strategic vision, right? So every country would have a vision. So in a similar way, both India and New Zealand also have their own visions, and according to their visions, they also frame their policy framework. For example, both these countries are Commonwealth Group of countries, first thing. The second thing is that both India and New Zealand are democracies. So therefore, we can say that these two countries are like-minded countries, right? Because these countries stand for democracy, liberal values and all. So in fact, New Zealand identifies India as a priority partner. For example, so New Zealand has launched initiatives such as opening doors to India in the year 2011 and New Zealand INC India strategy. So what these two strategies have been indicating? So one is opening doors to India strategy. So these strategies are launched by New Zealand. So they wanted to further strengthen their relationship with India. So because of this reason, they have launched these two programs. And apart from that, this was further deepened by India New Zealand 2025. So this is also an initiative to further strengthen the bilateral relations between India and New Zealand, which is India New Zealand 2025. For example, this India New Zealand 2025 will actually cover different dimensions of relations. For example, security, defense, tourism, connectivity, infrastructure development, investments, trade, commerce. So all these arenas, right? So therefore, it actually envisions a more enduring strategic partnership, a long-term partnership between India and New Zealand. So is envisioned by India New Zealand 2025. So even though New Zealand has already launched earlier programs to strengthen its relationship with India, for example, opening doors to India or New Zealand INC, but they are a bit outdated and old strategies. But the new strategy that New Zealand has launched is India New Zealand 2025 strategy. The objective is to further strengthen the strategic relationship with India. So with this objective, right? So however, if you look at the India New Zealand Trade Pact, so a detailed data has been given about the India and New Zealand trade. For example, in the financial year 2021. So if you look at the trade, the total exports $486.2 million US, and total imports $381.5 million US, right? So this is the data which has been indicating the trade between India and New Zealand in different financial years, right from 2021 to up to 2025 and 26 as well, right? So therefore you can also go through this data. And apart from that, the free trade agreement between India and New Zealand, so it aimed to promote the trade flows investment, because we have understood that so New Zealand aimed to invest rupees 20 billion, so 20 billion US into the Indian economy in the coming 15 years. So this was the one objective. The second objective is the bilateral trade would be 5 billion US in the coming 5 years. So this is also another objective of the free trade agreement. And then there is a need to strengthen supply chains. What exactly is strengthening supply chains? So strengthening supply chains in the sense that we are living in a globalized world. So when we are living in a globalized world, India may not have all the material, all the raw material within ourselves, within India itself. So therefore, we may depend on other countries for the raw materials. For example, do we have a crude oil? But we don't have a crude oil reserves that can meet our domestic demand. So because of that reason, 85% of the crude oil we have been importing from other countries, Russia, Middle East, all these countries, right? So we don't have the crude oil to meet the needs, the energy needs. So because of that reason, we have importing from other countries, right? So in this case, so crude oil, sourcing crude oil from Middle East, Russia, it is like a supply chain, right? So it is a supply chain. It's not just about the crude oil. Even if we procure any other raw materials, so that is also a supply chain. Now, you very often come across the term supply chain disruptions. What exactly is this supply chain disruption? Supply chain disruption means, for example, in case of a war in Middle East. So war in Middle East will, disrupt the production of crude oil in Middle East. So from Middle East, India may not be able to procure crude oil because of war. So that is the disruption of supply chains. Now, in this context, strengthening the supply chain resilience means we have a multiple sources of procuring crude oil. So if there is a war in Middle East, we should be able to import crude oil from Russia. We should be able to import crude oil from Africa, South America, and even USA. So this is what is called as strengthening the supply chain resilience. If one source is affected by some geopolitical reasons, we have other sources also, which is a supply chain resilience. And then address goods market access, because New Zealand is going to provide more access to Indian goods. There will be zero tariffs or very less tariffs on Indian goods which are exported into the New Zealand's markets. And then there will be non-tariff barriers will also be reduced, right? So there might be some certain non-tariff barriers as well. So non-tariff barriers in the sense that, for example, product quality. So New Zealand may deny the products if the quality of the product is suboptimal or not at par. Now these non-tariff barriers may also be reduced as part of the free trade agreement. So what New Zealand wants to sell to India? New Zealand wants to sell dairy products to India, fruits, wool and wine. So these are all the products that New Zealand wanted to sell to India as part of this free trade agreement. Now let's understand what are the key exports of India to New Zealand. For example, India is generally known for its strong, robust drugs manufacturing industry. So therefore, India would export drugs, pharmaceuticals and other biological drugs, and then petroleum products. Now, in fact, even though we are importing crude oil from other countries, 85% of crude oil from other countries, so this crude oil cannot be directly used. So this crude oil has to be processed into different products, and only then the crude oil derived products can be used as petrol, diesel and all those things. Even though India don't have this crude oil reserves, even though India has been importing crude oil from other countries, we have a strong processing facilities. So crude oil being imported, and then we process the crude oil and the derived products such as petrol, diesel, and we export those products into other countries. So therefore, India also export these petroleum products to other countries, New Zealand being one such country. And we also export cotton fabrics, made-ups, motor vehicles and even ready-made garments. So these are the key export sectors that India is going to export to New Zealand as part of this free trade agreement. However, so what are New Zealand's top exports to India? So New Zealand's top exports, if you look at that, fresh fruits, iron and steel, wood and its products, coal, coke, raw wool and dairy products. So these are the products that New Zealand would generally sell in Indian markets. So however, we can say that this free trade agreement is a win-win situation for both India and New Zealand, because both these countries are going to benefit from this FTA. So let's understand the trade and economic ties between India and New Zealand in detail. So for example, India is having the trade relations with number of countries throughout the world, but New Zealand being the India's 11th largest two-way trading partner. So two-way in the sense that both India and New Zealand export and import. So taking into consideration both export and import, New Zealand is the 11th largest trading partner for India. So this is one important fact about trade between India and New Zealand. However, now if you look at the bilateral trade between India and New Zealand, so in the financial year 23-24, the bilateral trade stands at 1.75 billion. However, one of the objective of this free trade agreement, so what was that one of the objective? In the coming 5 years, the bilateral trade should be reached to 5 billion US dollars. The bilateral trade should be 5 billion US dollars. However, the financial year 23-24, the bilateral trade stands at just 1.75 billion. So therefore, taking this trade to $5 billion is one of the objective. Now, in fact, there are certain key trade sectors which are going to benefit from this. What are those key trade sectors? For example, education is one such sector, tourism, sports, dairy farming, food processing, pharmaceuticals, renewable energy, critical minerals. So all these are the key sectors which are going to benefit from the free trade agreement. So we have already understood what are India's top exports to New Zealand and what are Indian top imports from New Zealand. So you can also go through this list as well. Now, let's understand how India-New Zealand free trade agreement, what are the key highlights of it? Because it is also having some key highlights of it. Now, in fact, this bilateral trade between India and New Zealand under this free trade agreement, so it is expected to double by the year in the coming 5 years. So because we have already understood that. So one of the objective is in the coming 5 years, the bilateral trade should be reached to 5 billion US dollars. So this is the objective. However, so financial year 23-24, the bilateral trade between India and New Zealand is valued at 1.75 billion US dollars only. So therefore, taking this to 5 billion US dollars in the coming years. And apart from that, there are other sectors also as part of the free trade agreement and beyond free trade agreement. Why don't we cooperate in strengthen our relationship in number of other areas? For example, education is one such area. Sports is one such area. Tourism, between India and New Zealand is also another important area. Research and development innovation is also another area, and strengthening the people-to-people relations. People-to-people relations. So people-to-people relations strengthening is long-term relationship. For example, a strong Indian diaspora is living in New Zealand. So what exactly is this diaspora? So diaspora means those people who are Indian origin and they are living in New Zealand. So they are called as diaspora. They belong to Indian origin or NRIs who are living in New Zealand. Now, in fact, this diaspora plays a very, very important role in strengthening India's soft power or goodwill. Now, what exactly is this soft power? Soft power in the sense that we all know that India is a diverse country, right? So it is religious diverse, linguistic diverse, regional diverse. So therefore, celebrating Indian festivals, sports, Indian culture. So everything will be spread by the Indian diaspora into New Zealand. So that will create a positive sentiment among the people of New Zealand about India. So that is the soft power and that is goodwill. So therefore, this diaspora also plays a very, very important role in strengthening India-New Zealand relationship, because this diaspora is an Indian origin people. They may have already got the voting rights as well. So therefore, they also influence the political outcomes in New Zealand. Right? So all these factors would further strengthen the bilateral relations between India and New Zealand. Now, apart from that, we have already understood that the objective of the free trade agreement, not just doubling the bilateral trade in the coming 5 years, but also $20 billion of investment in the coming 15 years will be achieved under this free trade agreement. Right? So New Zealand will invest in number of areas, right? And then healthcare is also another very important domain. So that will be focused on, right? So in fact, a dedicated health and traditional medicinal annex. So New Zealand's first such agreement with any country facilitates trade in health services as well, right? Now, apart from that, tariff liberalization is also another arena. Now, one thing that we should understand, what exactly is this tariff liberalization? So tariff liberalization means that Indian goods no longer need to pay the tariffs when they are entering into New Zealand's market, which is tariff liberalization. Or Indian goods may pay a lesser tariffs when they are entering into New Zealand's markets. So this is tariff liberalization. So as per this free trade agreement, if you look at the tariff liberalization, 95% of New Zealand's exports will see tariffs eliminated or reduced. Secondly, 57% of exports to India will be duty free from day one of this free trade agreement has been signed, and this 57 will be increased to 82% in a gradual manner with the full implementation of this free trade agreement, and the remaining 13% will see a significant tariff cuts. Now, why there are tariffs? So there are tariffs because it is important to protect the domestic industry. It is important to protect the domestic industries, right? So if we import tariffs, if we impose tariffs, so that will reduce the imports from other countries. For example, China very often flood Indian markets with cheap goods manufactured in China. So the manufacturing costs in China is very less, and therefore China manufacture a lot of amount of goods and they dump those goods into Indian markets. So if we import everything from China, what about our domestic industries which are manufacturing the same products? Who will buy Indian products? Right? Because Chinese products are less costly compared to Indian products. And Chinese products are also less quality products. However, people will prefer buying Russian goods because of their low cost or cheaper cost. So because of that reason, nobody will buy, or less number of people will buy Indian products. So therefore, there is a need to, prevent China dumping those products into Indian markets. So the one such way is imposing tariffs. Okay, so what is tariffs? Now India can import Chinese goods, but before entering these goods into Indian markets, they have to pay a certain price, and that tax is tariff, so that Indian industries can compete with these Chinese goods. So Chinese goods will also become costly. If there is a tariff, if there is a price imposed by the government, Chinese goods will also become costly, and therefore there will be a level playing field for Indian industries. And apart from that, Indian industries can also compete with these cheap, low quality Chinese goods. So that is the objective. However, India is having certain sensitive sectors. For example, dairy sector is a sensitive sector because a lot of farmers, women are engaged in this. Onions, sugar, spices, edible oils, rubber, rice, wheat. So these are the sensitive sectors where India may not completely eliminate tariffs. There might be some tariffs on these products. So apart from that, this free trade agreement give a boost to employment. For example, textile sector is going to benefit from this free trade agreement. So there will be more textile products export to New Zealand. So if more textiles are exported to New Zealand, then there will be increased production in existing textile manufacturing units. So increased production means more employment opportunities, no manufacturing basis. So therefore, it can also provide employment opportunities in number of sectors, including automobiles, auto components, machinery, electronics, pharmaceuticals, electricals, textiles, rubber. So all these sectors are going to provide large scale employment to Indian youth. And in fact, it is also expected that 500 temporary employment visas annually for Indian professionals. For example, if there is any Indian who is skilled and who wanted to work in New Zealand, New Zealand will provide 5,000 visas every year for Indians. Right? So New Zealand is also a country which has been suffering from demographic decline or decline in population, working age population. But on the other hand, India is having a huge working age population. So therefore, why don't we channelize the Indian demography into other countries? So that is one such aspect as part of this free trade agreement. So New Zealand will provide 5,000 visas every year. So it is valid up to, each visa is valid up to 3 years. Right. So I hope you have understood this. And the next very important topic is right to healthy environment in India. So let's understand this. So in fact, air pollution is a problem in India, right? So particularly in major cities, air pollution is a problem, and we very often hear news about air pollution problem in Delhi. So therefore, rising air pollution in Delhi NCR has renewed or increased the debate of recognizing the right to healthy environment as an explicit constitutional right. Now, as of now, right to healthy environment is not an explicit constitutional right. Explicit constitutional right in the sense that, like how we have Article 14, Article 15, we don't have right to healthy environment as such explicit right, but right to healthy environment has been recognized as an implicit right within Article 21, right to life and personal liberty, right? So however, right to life and personal liberty, however, so there has been a demand that why don't we recognize right to healthy environment as an explicit right like this, so that if anybody's rights are violated, they will be enforced by the courts. Because in the context of increasing air pollution in India, however, India faces recurring environmental crisis. So air pollution is one component in this environmental crisis that India has been facing, right? So for example, air pollution is one such a severe and a worst environmental crisis, particularly during winter months in Delhi, right? So in fact, the reasons are vehicular pollutions. Because of huge traffic, vehicular emissions, they contribute to air pollution. Industrial activity contribute to air pollution. Fossil fuel use, it also contribute to air pollution. Construction dust, waste burning, agricultural residue burning. So these are the key factors which actually cause large scale air pollution in Delhi NCR and other parts, right? So therefore, these factors affect public health, and it also leads to respiratory illness, cardiovascular diseases, non-communicable diseases among the people, and also reduces the life expectancy of the people who are living in Delhi NCR. Now, apart from air pollution, ill effects on human health and environmental health. So another major problem with this air pollution is particulate matter. This particulate matter can easily enter into the bloodstream of people, and it can easily enter into the lungs. So therefore, it can actually pose health risks to people. Right. So in this context, if we talk about the particulate matter, there are two different types of particulate matter. One is particulate matter 10 and particulate matter 2.5. And in fact, they are most harmful to the human health because they penetrate deep into the lungs and they penetrate into the bloodstream as well, causing worst effects on the health. However, a diesel particulate matter which has been generated from these vehicle emissions, so which is a subcategory of 2.5 particulate matter. Now, in fact, this diesel PM particulate matter is explicitly toxic and it actually poses serious risks to children and even vulnerable populations as well. However, in order to combat air pollution in Delhi, a statutory organization has been provided, which is Commission for Air Quality Management, CAQM. So, Commission for Air Quality Management is a statutory organization established through a law passed by the Parliament. Now, in fact, in case of severe levels of air pollution, the Commission for Air Quality Management will start implementing the Graded Response Action Plan. So, as part of the Graded Response Action Plan, there are 4 plans. Plan 1, Plan 2, Plan 3 and Plan 4. Now, in fact, if the air pollution in Delhi reach to poor condition, so they will start imposing ban restrictions on vehicle movements. If it reach to level 2, then there will be severe restrictions and more restrictions in 4 and 3 also. Right, so that is how the Graded Response Action Plan is implemented by the Commission for Air Quality Management. The objective is to prevent or reduce air pollution problem in Delhi. With the objective, it has been created. Right. So therefore, there is a need to effectively implement the Graded Response Action Plan to prevent air pollution. So let's understand the constitutional basis of environmental protection. So what constitutional basis it actually has. Now, in fact, as I have already told you that right to healthy environment is not an explicit right. It is not an explicit right. So I hope you have understood what exactly is an explicit right. But it is an implicit right which is part of Article 21, right to life of the Indian Constitution. There are several other rights. So along with that, Supreme Court has also recognized right to healthy environment is part of Article 21. Now, in fact, the Article 21 right to life and personal liberty also includes right to clean and healthy environment. However, so this interpretation of the Supreme Court about this particular right, it has been developed through the landmark judgments of the Supreme Court. And it has begun with Maneka Gandhi versus Union of India judgment 1975. Now, in this Maneka Gandhi judgment, the Supreme Court has actually broadened the meaning of life. So life actually means that not just living a life, a mechanical life. So life means that, in order to live a dignified life, you need different things. So one is right to clean and healthy environment. So if you wanted to live a dignified life, you need a right to clean and healthy environment. So if you wanted to live a dignified life, so you also need other important rights, right? So therefore, Maneka Gandhi versus Union of India judgment, the Supreme Court has widened the scope of the definition of life beyond more physical existence. Life means not just physical existence. We have to understand that. Right? So there's no difference. If it is just a physical existence, there is no difference between existence of a human being, existence of an animal. So life actually means more than physical existence, and that has been first time recognized by the Supreme Court in Maneka Gandhi judgment 1978. So therefore, After this Menaka Gandhi judgment, there are series of constitutional amendments. The constitutional amendments have actually strengthened the constitutional responsibility of the state and central governments towards the environment. Now, one such thing is Article 48 of the Indian Constitution. So, Article 48A of the Indian Constitution of Directive Principles of State Policy, it talks about the duty of the state to protect and improve environment. Now, apart from DPSPs, so there is also another article as part of fundamental duties, which is Article 51A Clause G. So it talks about duty of every citizen of India to safeguard the natural resources. Right? So therefore, there is an environmental obligation not just for the state but also for the individual as well. Right? So therefore, together these two provisions, Article 48A of the Directive Principles of State Policy and Article 51A(g) of the fundamental duties, so they actually create a shared constitutional obligation towards the environmental protection for both state and the citizen. Now, in this context, let's understand what exactly is the role of judiciary and the public interest litigation in ensuring a healthy living environment for every citizen. Now, since mid 1980s, from 1985 onwards, so India experienced a rapid industrialization, no doubt about that, and India has also opened up its economy in the year 1991 through economic reforms. So all these factors, what happened was it has led to environmental degradation, and environmental degradation means number of people started approaching the judiciary, and judiciary's intervention was judiciary was very frequently intervened in this environmental matters because of industrialization, urbanization, environmental degradation. So all these factors have deteriorated the environment, the life of people. So people started approaching the courts, right? So however, Article 32 of the Indian Constitution, right to constitutional remedies, and Article 226, so it talks about the writ jurisdiction of the High Court and writ jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. So both Supreme Court and High Court can issue writs for the enforcement of the fundamental rights. So therefore, these courts have used these two articles to address the environmental harm, right? So ensure that there will be a healthy living environment or healthy environment. However, courts have consistently balanced the developmental needs with the environmental sustainability, reinforcing the idea that economic growth cannot come at the cost of ecological destruction. So what exactly is this balanced development? So we very often emphasized on the balanced development. So the balanced development actually means that a development, so which takes into consideration the economic needs and at the same time the environmental needs also. It balances both economic needs and environmental needs, right? So for example, vehicular emissions are causing pollution. So in order to protect the environment, you should not completely ban the movement of vehicles because that will affect the environment, right? So therefore, in order to achieve full economic growth, you should not completely destroy the environment. You need to balance both, which is the balanced development, and Supreme Court has also taken this stance of achieving the balanced development. However, the Environment Protection Act 1986 was passed to further strengthen this framework by defining the environment. So environment is interconnected system of air, water, land and living beings, both animals and human beings. So this is how environment has been defined by the Environment Protection Act, so which actually balances everything, right? So therefore, the judicial rulings, so the intervention by the courts have clarified that the right to live with dignity includes the right to live in a pollution-free environment, a right to pollution-free air, water, making environmental protection an enforceable legal concern. So I hope you have understood this. And the next important topic is redrawing the Aravalis. So we have already discussed about this Aravalis and the threat the Aravali River, Aravali mountains have been facing, right? So Aravalli Mountains have been protecting the northern part of India, particularly the Indo-Gangetic plains, from expanding Thar Desert. Aravalli Mountains also play a very important role because several rivers originate from the Aravalli rivers. Aravalli rivers are also known for their rich biodiversity, right? So rich biodiversity, flora, fauna, environment, they also moderate environment, climate. But now Aravalli Mountains have been facing a threat, which is mining. So mining plus illegal mining. So these are the dual threats to the Aravalli Mountains. They actually threaten the existence of the Aravalli Mountains, and that's why there is a large scale public debate about the protection of Aravalli Mountains against mining, particularly this illegal mining. So let's understand this in a very brief way. So we'll get the overall picture about this. So in fact, the government has defined Aravalli Hills. Now, in fact, the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change has said that there is no immediate ecological threat and the range remains protected by the government, with mining allowed in only 0.19% of the total area. Right. Now, government, despite threats to the Aravalli Mountains, has not banned mining, but government allowed that 0.19% of the Aravalli Mountains will be used for mining. Now, apart from that, we should understand this is also part of the balanced development. Balanced development in the sense that mining in Aravallis will not be completely banned. Mining will not be banned because of the economic reasons. And at the same time, mining will also be not allowed completely. Right, only 0.19% of the Aravalli Hills will be allowed for mining and rest of the Aravalli Hills will be protected. So there will be mining and at the same time protection of the Aravalli Hills. But people have been claiming that even allowing 0.19% of mining of Aravalli Hills will have a huge consequences. So therefore it should not be allowed. Now I hope you have known the location of Aravalli Hills. So Aravalli Hills spread across the states of Gujarat, Rajasthan, so some parts of Madhya Pradesh and Haryana, Delhi. So in fact, the Aravalli Hills play a very important role in spreading or expansion of the desert, the Thar Desert in Rajasthan into the northern part of India. So in the northern part of India, we have a fertile alluvial plains which are known for the rich and fertile soils and agricultural productivity. If this desert expands to those areas, then those lands will also turn into desert or arid or semi-arid areas. So agricultural productivity will get affected. So because of that reason, the Aravalli Mountains are very important. Now, in fact, the government has as of now paused new mining leases because there is a need to conduct a comprehensive study, but critics have been arguing that official assurances do not address the disputed court submissions or broader environmental threats beyond mining. Right. Now, in this context, so let's understand this. A new Aravalli definition has been given by the government. Right. So what new definition has been given by the government with respect to Aravalli Hills? So the new definition of Aravalli Hills approved by the Supreme Court in the year 2025, and it classifies only those landforms in the Aravalli Hills rising above 100 meters or more above the local relief along with their slopes and adjoining areas as part of the range. So any area which rises up to 100 meters and its adjoining areas and its slopes will be considered as part of the Aravalli Hills. The rest of the area will not be considered as part of the Aravalli Hills. So therefore that means if those areas which are not part of the Aravalli Hills, mining will be allowed to be carried out. So that is the problem. So public have been arguing that the government has deliberately and intentionally given this definition and classification of Aravalli Hills to allow rampant mining in the Aravalli Hills. Right? So therefore the Environment Ministry has said that no new mining leases will be given until a detailed study is completed under the court's order. Right. Now in this context, so if you look at the Aravalli Hills, so they are a shield against the desert, because this is all desert. So this is considered as a Aravalli Hills range, and it is actually blocking the expansion of the desert into the northern part of India. Right. So eastern part of India. So that's why it is a shield against the desert. And in fact, a forest belt likely to run from Porbandar in Gujarat to Panipat in Haryana near Delhi, covering the entire Aravalli range and beyond. So in fact, it is considered as a green wall. This green wall will act as a barrier to stop dust coming from this Thar desert and marching this dust into the northern parts or Indo-Gangetic plains towards eastwards. Now in fact, this also plays a very important role to check desertification and restoring degraded land through massive afforestation. And in fact, this project yet to get formal node. So this is, we're talking about this green wall project, right? Now let's understand what remains protected under the Aravallis. Let's understand about this as well. So what will be protected under this? Now in fact, several parts of Aravallis will continue to enjoy strong legal protection. So including the tiger reserves, national parks, wildlife sanctuaries, eco-sensitive. So there are a number of areas in Aravalli reserves because of Aravalli mountains, because of their biodiversity, ecological richness, huge flora and fauna. So these areas will be protected as per the government. However, these areas remain close to mining. So mining will not be allowed in these sensitive areas. Right? So unless explicitly permitted under wildlife or forest laws, regardless whether they fall within revised Aravalli definition. Right? So these areas will be protected from mining. There will be no doubt about that. However, the protection is not always a permanent thing, because such safeguards can be revised or diluted in future as well, and that is the concern of the people. Because a recent attempt by the center in Rajasthan, so they planned to redefine the boundaries of Sariska Tiger Reserve, which is located in Rajasthan in this Aravalli ranges. So which could have opened a nearby areas for mining. And it was halted only after interventions by the Supreme Court, highlighting a fragility of regulatory protection. Okay, the government has been saying that all these places are very sensitive, they will be protected. But government in future may revise these regulations, may dilute these regulations, allowing those areas for the mining. So therefore, there is a need for strong protection of Aravalli Hills. However, now in fact, there are several districts which are part of this Aravalli mountains, and in fact, a few districts are actually dropped from the list of Aravalli. Now, in fact, these are the districts which actually have the Aravalli mountains, but they actually dropped from the list of Aravalli mountains. So several districts earlier counted among the 34 Aravalli districts across the states of Gujarat, Rajasthan, Haryana and Delhi are now excluded from this definition. For example, Savai Madhopur Ranthambore Tiger Reserve, so which is Aravalli and Vindhya convergence. Chittorgarh, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site on an Aravalli outcrop, so that has also been exempted. And Nagaur, where FSI mapped 1110 square kilometers as Aravalli. So they are also missing from the updated list submitted to the Supreme Court by the government. So therefore, there are a lot of shortcomings in this definition. And if mining is allowed, then there will be erosion of Aravalli mountains, and this is the key concern of the public. Now let's understand another very important topic, internationalization of higher education. So recently, Niti Aayog has released a report, and the report name is Internationalization of Higher Education in India, the Prospects, Potential and Policy Recommendations. However, now the key objective of this internalization of higher education is to align Indian higher education standards with the National Education Policy of 2020, and that comes soon after introduction of Viksit Bharat Shiksha Adhishtanan Bill 2025. Now in fact, this Vikasit Bharat Shiksha Adhistan Bill 2025, which aims to overhaul the entire higher education regulation in India. Right? So therefore, the focus is on correcting the severe imbalances between inbound and outbound student mobility, positioning India as a global education and research. So that means students from other countries can come and study in India, and Indian students will prefer Indian universities, Indian educational institutions rather than going out of the country. So with that objective, Niti Aayog has actually launched this new report. So what is the rationale for the internationalization of higher education in India? Let's understand this. Now in 2024, every one international student studying in India, 28 students went abroad. So one international student, for example, imagine that 100 international students are studying in India. So that means around 2800 Indian students were studying abroad. So why don't we retain this talent pool? Why Indian students are going abroad? Why? Because the higher education system standards are poor. So therefore, we need to retain Indian talent pool and at the same time attracting the foreign students in India. So as of 2022, India hosted only 47,000 international students despite 518% increase since 2001. However, the forecasts have been suggesting that 7.89 to 11 lakh international students will come and study in India by the year 2047, depending on the policy intensity, the standards of higher education system in India. However, now in this context, if we internationalize higher education system in India, it will be crucial for India's knowledge diplomacy, because several international students will come and study in India, and Indian students will also don't go abroad in such a large numbers, and it will lead to the talent circulation, reducing the brain drain and even the economic sustainability as well. So with this objective, Niti Aayog has actually released this report, and I hope you have understood this. And that's all for today, and thank you so much.